Section, we're going to talk about more polygon modeling, and probably the most useful and versatile way of modeling is this function called extruding. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to build on the extruding into some other really fun ways of changing it. So go ahead and create a cube. So Shift A, cube. And if you tab out of object mode into edit mode, that's where you need to be. So starting with the cube is a very good place to see how extruding works. Now you can extrude edges and faces. You can also extrude vertices, but it's very strange and not used so often. So I will demonstrate it just so you can see how it would work. But let's play around with it. So the keyboard shortcuts are going to be the same throughout. So again, if you hit 1 on your actual keyboard, not your keypad, you'll be in vertex mode. Let me give you another shortcut here now that I think of it. Just hitting the letter A on your keyboard will select all of your vertices. If you hit A twice, it will deselect all of your object. Okay, A once, A quickly twice to deselect. So we're going to be in deselected, and let's just choose this vertex here. Now extruding, very easy keyboard shortcut to remember, is hitting the letter E on your keyboard, E for extrude. Now when you do that, your cursor changes, look, and all that happens is if you move your mouse to the left or right or up or down, you will extrude or create another vertex connected to the first one that you selected. So you're actually adding geometry, right? As I mentioned, this is not the most useful way of extruding. In fact, I don't ever extrude this way. I'm sure it has a function, but not in my skills. But that would be adding a new point to the geometry. So if I tab back out of here and I go into object mode, I now have this sort of edge created, right? Because I've created a new vertex. So I've created a new edge. It wouldn't render because there's really nothing attached to it. There's no face attached to it. The only thing that would render is this cube. Okay, so there's just a line created. All right, so let me if I click on this vertex and I hit X, I can say delete vertices, and I go back to where I was. So delete works in edit mode a little bit differently than in object mode. If you hit X in edit mode, you have all these options: delete vertices, edges, faces, only edges and faces, etc., etc. All right, let's move on. So hitting the number 2 or clicking this object puts you into edge mode. Now if I click on an edge and I hit the letter E to extrude, now we start to understand what extruding is really doing. So as I pull this edge out, I'm creating a new face with it. I'm adding to the geometry. We haven't done that yet. We haven't done anything where we've just pushed and pulled geometry. We haven't added anything. Now the cool thing about this is if I as I'm in this kind of live mode where it's just moving with my mouse, if I hit the X key, if I hit the Y key in this case, I'm going to be perfectly moving this along the Y axis. So I could move it to the Y axis, let's say out to here, and left click to fix it. And I hit E again, and I extrude, and I hit Z, I can extrude along the Z axis. So now I've just created this kind of 2 new faces and completely new geometry. 2 extrusions, that's it, and things changed quickly. So play around a little bit on your own with hitting E. You can pause the video and selecting the object, hitting E, and then playing around with extruding in different axes. Right, is pretty. You can start to create this weird box. Okay, so the next phase is, of course, extruding faces. So I'm going to, just to make things easy, I'm going to tab out of here. I'm going to hit X, delete this, and start with a new cube. Okay, so in edit mode, by hitting tab, hitting A twice to deselect an object. A once selects the whole thing. And let's go into face mode. Hit 3 on your keyboard or press this button up here on the top left. And let's choose this top face here. Hit the E on your keyboard, extrude. Now, default, this is interesting, with extruding faces, the default will be along the axis that the face, I guess, is facing. So it's already defaulting to the Z axis. I didn't have to press Z. If I do press Y, I can extrude the face along the Y axis, although it's kind of strange and you create some issues with it, as you can see in the way it's modeling, or the X axis. But let's just let it extrude in the Z axis. Let's say to here, and then left click to finish. And now I've created a new shape. I've created 4 new faces, 5 new faces, I guess, 4 new faces. And I can go along now and very quickly create, just all I'm doing is clicking a face and hitting E, clicking a face and hitting E, click a face, hit E, and extrude, and left click to finish. I highly recommend just doing this for a while to get the feel for how the extrusion works, and also get the feel of how you can dramatically alter the shape and form of something as simple as a cube into something much more complicated. I think this is a good time to, oh yeah, gonna go down and move it at an angle, to talk about the difference between this kind of hard edge geometry and what's called smooth shading. So I'm just going to mention it here, throw it in here. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but if you tab out of here into object mode, and we're going to get way more into smoothing later, but there's a kind of quick and dirty way to smooth or simulate what your object looks like smooth. And by right clicking in the object mode, if you choose shade smooth, now when there's limited faces, you do get a weird look, and we're going to learn how to make this look a lot less weird later. But you do start to see what it's trying to do is simulate what it would look like if you kind of smoothed out the edges. The more geometry you have, the more the smoothing, the better the smoothing works. So if I go back and I say shade flat again, back to the original, and I go back here. Now if I give you a little example here, if I extrude this face just a little bit and extrude it again just a little bit, and do that, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, just so you can see the difference between something that has more geometry and something that has less geometry. If I go back into this mode, object mode, and I go back and I shade smooth, and it doesn't show you too well, but you actually can see that the smoothing quality of this new portion that I made is better than the stuff I was doing before. It wasn't the greatest example, but I promise that we'll make it. We'll make other objects that look better, that look more smooth. Okay. Anyway. Okay, so hopefully you've played around with extruding and ready to move on to the next step. I think it's also a good idea to extrude faces from other objects and other shapes, other primitive shapes. So I'm gonna delete this, and just quickly for fun, go ahead and create one of these icospheres. Now when these are created, you get this great option here where you can change how many subdivisions you want, or how much geometry there is, and the radius. So I'm going to leave it at 3. I'm going to click it, go into edit mode, click off the object to deselect it, or hit A twice. And in face mode, I'm going to select a few faces. Just select a few faces, hit E, and notice that they all extrude together. Okay? All the faces extrude together. Now, if you select a face here, let me just show you some differences in ways that this can extrude. You also can extrude in the opposite direction, I should say. So hit E, and you can extrude in, right? So now we've extruded a face outward and a face inward. It still creates new faces, right? It created this face, oops, and this face. And it took the face that we originally selected and it dropped it inside this object.